I love plants. Even more than animals. Because they're dumb. I had to identify her. Her face seemed much smaller to me than when she was alive. Stella had been happy for a short while. But she was incapable of learning the rules of the game. And I did exactly as I shouldn't have done. In other words, nothing. I made every effort to see and hear nothing. It wasn't worth the bother to me. But it should have been. Why did nothing warn me on that September evening when Stella came to us? Richard has taken the children to his mother's for the weekend. He did ask me to come. But only because he knew I'd say no. I wanted to be alone. At last. I have 2 days ahead of me now. 2 days to think. I'm finding it hard to concentrate with this tiny bird screeching in the lime tree. Surely her mother will come and get her. It's ridiculous how this tiny bird is irritating me so much. If only the glass in the window were thicker. It's not this bird I need to talk about. I need to talk about Stella. I have to talk about Stella before I begin to forget her. And I will have to forget her if I want to return to my quiet life. Stella's getting her revenge. Taking from me the one thing my heart longs for. That's nonsense. Stella can't take revenge. I'm avenging Stella on myself. That's the truth. And that's just as it should be. I would much rather be dead like her. I have to listen to this tiny bird screeching. Why does no one protect me from its screeching? It didn't suit me to take this strange 19-year-old into our home. Richard wasn't taken with the idea either. He did it to please me. Stella's stay would only last for the school year. She wasn't very good at her schoolwork. I couldn't say what she was any good at. She was able to handle animals and plants, and she liked to knit cardigans and socks for charity. Richard used to tease her for her charitable works. She'd look up and laugh awkwardly, like a person who still has to learn how to laugh. She never overcame her reserve around me. I assumed this had to do with her mother's poor treatment of her. Every woman of her mother's age would probably seem dangerous to Stella. I was always friendly to Stella, in the same way I'm friendly to the postman or William's school friends. One day I noticed the touching serenity with which Stella wore her dresses. These brown, wine red and purple monstrosities. They were all either too big or too small for her. She'd be a beauty, I said to Richard, if we got her decent dresses. He looked up at me in astonishment from his newspaper. Do you think so? Suddenly I had an idea. What if I taught Stella how to dress? The following week I had a few dresses made for her. Nothing expensive, brightly coloured, suitable for a young girl. The transformation was total. Stella stood in front of the mirror and saw herself for the first time. Stella, you were beautiful. Beautiful. I'm beautiful. I should have felt triumphant. What disturbed me was Stella's face in the mirror. She had ceased to be Stella the child. There was an emptiness in her breast that would draw the world in. I didn't like that. It wasn't in my power to direct the stream that would fill that emptiness. Stella? Don't you still have study to do this evening? The light in her eyes went out. That evening, Richard didn't notice yet that a new Stella sat opposite him. But Annette noticed it. So did William. And Stella just sat there, in her strawberry red dress, eating almost nothing, staring into space. Our household doesn't tolerate interlopers. No one else knows the countless taboos we have to observe in the way we deal with one another. Even the children respect them. There are two camps in our house. Richard and Annette, and William and me. We stick closely to the rules of the game. Richard engages in brief, overly enthusiastic conversations with William. William responds with perfect politeness. Little Annette sometimes sits on my lap, and I put her to bed. She kisses and hugs me. Instinctively, I should love her. If she weren't just so like her father. It's not her fault. Sometimes the mere sight of her fills me with abhorrence. The two of them. They're born decoys, traps that God or whoever has laid for the rest of us. Annette will always get what she wants. She's as weak and helpless as a young tiger or a flesh-eating plant. Since Richard loves nothing as much as himself, he does also love his little reflection. As a young woman, I asked Richard once, "Why do you love me?" His response, swift, clear. "Because you belong to me." That November, my son and I were immersed in the world of Troy. I was helping William translate the Iliad. My room was our little ship. Reality melted away around us. His heart beat for Cassandra, prophetess. His prophecies are doomed to be ignored. How such a figure could be compelling to a 15-year-old boy. One evening, Stella announced she was going to take an Italian course. Would be home late 3 evenings a week. She stood before me blushing, avoiding my gaze. I was completely indifferent. She could take a course in Kyrgyzstan as far as I was concerned. She wasn't my child. She could do as she pleased. I said something about a cold supper. Dived back into the world of Troy with William. Stella went regularly to her evening course. During that time, she began to blossom into a young woman. But as pleasant as it was to look at her, I almost preferred her in her old brown dresses. Then Richard began to go out with her. It was my idea, as I recall. Hate going to certain social events. I was delighted to have found a partner for him. I had a white dress made for Stella. She looked like a princess. Richard was proud. After the two of them were gone, I went to the kitchen to get the tea for the children. "Wasn't Stella really pretty this evening?" I said to William. "Like a princess?" "Like a princess? That's ridiculous. Stupid little fool, that's what she is. You're 100 times more beautiful, Mum." "That's really sweet of you, darling." But it's not true. Stella really did look like a princess. Later, as I sat at the edge of his bed, I could see there was something on his mind. What's up? Why can't you come away with me in the summer? Just the two of us, on our own. Annette could go to Granny. Dad is old enough to go somewhere on his own. William was right. We could have a glorious time together. Just the two of us. Some lake. Or in the mountains. Why should I go away with Richard every year? Every year I dread this trip. Every year I just go along without resistance. Why shouldn't I finally be allowed to do what I want? Richard and Stella came home late that evening. I pretended to be asleep. That night I dreamt I threw a stone after poor Cassandra in the open street, sensed by her prophecies. But when I awoke, I completely forgot what she'd said to me. Richard thinks I wear my blue dresses because they suit my colouring. He doesn't know that I wear them for protection. The blue keeps everything away from me. Stella loved red and yellow. She was wearing the red dress I gave her when she... When I'm alone in the house, I'm always aware that it's not my house. I feel like a lodger. I used to think that at least I had a home. But since Stella is dead, the golden cage has become a dungeon. If I'm not mistaken, the garden is withdrawing from the house. The little bird is still perched in the lime tree. All night through she hasn't moved from her spot. She's so tiny now you could hardly call her a bird. She's fallen out of her world, out of the hand of the bird god. I want to talk about Stella, about the way we killed her. One evening, William and I were sitting at the table reading. It was lovely and quiet in the room. I kept thinking, Richard will come home any minute and disturb our lovely peace with his busyness. I got up and went to the window. It had been raining for days. There was Stella, coming up the garden path, swaying as though she were drunk. It took another 5 minutes or so for her to come into the room. You're trembling, Stella. Something the matter? Then I noticed William staring at her surreptitiously. There were buttons missing from Stella's blouse. William, it's getting late. You should go to bed. I wondered if I should say something to her. Then I left it. Richard arrived home soon after, hungry, ate more than was good for him. He talked about the trial he'd attended that day. His client had walked free. I was supposed to get the impression this had put him in such good spirits. He couldn't fool me. I know that cheerful mood, the satisfaction of the man who's been with a new woman. I went to bed, pretended to be asleep when he came in. He switched off the light and pushed his hand under my cover. I wasn't repulsed by his hand on me. It was just that old, familiar fear of the animal of prey that's tame on the surface, as long as he's well fed and satisfies himself with minor nightly hunting excursions. When he was asleep, I slid out of bed and went to the kitchen to get myself a glass of water. As I passed Stella's door, I could hear her crying. It sounded ugly. I thought of the missing buttons on her blouse. Stella was straying from the straight and narrow. It would be my duty to warn her, to talk sense to her, or at least to comfort her. I did none of that. Hate, unrestrained outbursts of emotion. I cursed my short-sightedness for getting her new clothes and sending her out with Richard. I knew the kind of men she'd meet. Horrible, lecherous liars. It would be easy for any of them to seduce a simple creature like Stella. As I lay in bed again, it struck me that Richard only smelt of his shaving lotion. The woman he had been with that evening didn't use perfume. I sat up in the bed and stared at the face on the pillow beside me. I felt nauseous. I should have known that nothing is off limits for Richard. A girl like Stella would be a welcome change for a man who's had more than his fill of every kind of love. You shouldn't lead the lamb into the wolf's den. I concentrated all of my feelings on William. I soon became obsessed. I came to realize this myself. I began to monitor myself quite strictly. Nobody knows how often I withdrew the half-lifted hand that longed to touch his hair. Nobody knows how often I stood at his bedroom door and silently withdrew and closed myself off from the scent of his skin. The measure of tenderness I allowed myself was just enough to keep me alive. Without causing harm to William. Stella became calmer, full of her secret happiness. I knew I should take Richard to task. I could already hear his astonished tones of protest. He never admits to anything. That's his tactic and his strength. As long as Stella's young body still appealed to him, he wouldn't give her up. But as soon as his appetite was satisfied, he'd drop her in an instant. She was completely enslaved. She'd prefer to be beaten to death than to betray him. I thought of the brief span that was left to Stella's happiness. I decided not to talk to Richard. Stella suddenly stopped going to her Italian course. I was careful to spare her, not to torture her with useless questions. She spent every evening at home now. I often sat with her over a cup of tea, waiting for Richard. He was busy at work, always late home, sometimes smelled of an unfamiliar perfume. Stella would stay up pretending to read the newspaper, so tired she could hardly keep her eyes open. I knew what was going on inside her. She was waiting desperately to catch sight of Richard, to get him to look her way. I often wondered again if I should say something to her. Didn't want to hear a confession. But I was tired of lying. One afternoon I invited her to come to town with me, to distract her. She was completely absent-minded. I felt awkward beside this moving goddess of unhappiness. Took her to a cafe where Richard meets his chess friends. Tried to awaken her from her trance. Stella? Stella? She didn't hear me. She was staring straight past me, her eyes wide open in horror. Someone at the next table was greeting me. A friend of Richard's. A gynecologist. Shall we go, Stella? At home, I sent her straight to bed, gave her one of my sleeping tablets. Richard arrived home soon after in the best of spirits. He kissed me on the cheek. Surprised I didn't feel any disgust. And what did you do all day? I was in town with Stella. Oh, by the way, we met your friend, Dr. Wynne, the gynecologist. Friend would be an exaggeration. I haven't seen him in ages. Anything else to report? No, nothing else. And what has William been up to all this time? No complaints, I hope? No complaints. I could have laughed in his face. I'd like to have said, my dear Richard, you don't have to remind me that you can use William to bribe me. I didn't say it. He'd only punish me. Me and William. I felt sick, tired. I went to bed. Soon after, I felt Richard's hand on my shoulder. He talked about a ring he'd seen that would match my evening dress beautifully. I didn't move. He didn't take his hand away. We lay there until I fell asleep. That night I dreamt I lay buried in a cellar. Huge load of scorched walls on top of me, slowly crushing me. Stella's mother didn't arrive until after the funeral. She was away travelling with her boyfriend, a young master's student. Seen from the outside, we were a respectable middle-aged couple trying to comfort a mother racked by pain. Only Louise is not a mother racked by pain. Stella's death is very convenient for her. We knew that. She knew that we knew that. Excused myself, said I had to check on something in the kitchen. I went to the bathroom, applied a little rouge. The pallor didn't suit me. Stella had been pale too in the final weeks before her death. She was 19. The suffering enhanced her face, made her look grown up, charming. A woman over 30 should be able to stop suffering. It does nothing for her looks. Stella had a refinement of the heart. It showed itself in the way she died. It was so considerate of her to step off the footpath so that it looked like an accident. She wanted to be dead. Life had forgotten to hold her with a little love, kindness, patience. We have cause to be grateful. How embarrassing it would have been if she had thrown herself out of a window. Or taken my sleeping tablets. Stella was a burden to all of us. An obstacle that's now finally cleared out of the way. Removing stains is a strange thing. I've never in my life managed to get rid of one. I deeply distrust women who claim they can scrub away stains. Our stained clothes all wander off to the dry cleaners. They return clean, it's true, but they're transformed into transparent little shreds. I had just had breakfast when the phone rang. At first I couldn't understand a word. But then the stranger's voice repeated everything for me. Slowly and very precisely. I went to the accident and emergency clinic. When the doctor came, I could see from his face that she was dead. I couldn't understand how this strange white bundle should be Stella. Only to hours earlier she had left me alive. I put my hand on her cheek. It was already cold. They gave me her bag and I went home. Stella was dead. Stella was dead. A sense of relief came over me. Never again would I have to rack my brain as to what to say to her. Never again would I have to look at her pale, tortured face. Stella was dead. Now I could return to my old quiet life with William. The garden. The good daily routine. When William came home, I told him what had happened. Does Dad know? He went to the hall and picked up the phone. Stella's dead. The person speaking in the hall was not my child. It was a strange, embittered man, completely grown up. Cold. No mercy. I heard him go to the kitchen to make tea. I had the desire to put the cup down, to draw him towards me, to cry at last. But I was ashamed in front of this new William. Only when he left the room did I begin to cry. I cried for William, for Stella, for Richard, for myself. I thought I would never stop crying. Nothing can undo the day when William said with his back turned to me, "Can you explain to Dad that I'd like to go away to boarding school in the autumn?" I wrote to them myself. There are still places free. I think Dad will be fine with that. The baby bird isn't perched on her branch anymore. Her mother didn't come. No doubt her little body is lying below in the shrubbery. In a few days it'll have dissolved, as though she'd never existed. Richard will be home soon with the children. I don't know how things will continue for us now. I just don't know. I'd like to close my eyes, sleep, and forget. But I can't. My thoughts continue to run on, and it starts all over again. Louise walks into the room and asks if I could take Stella for the year. We go to the train station to collect her. Richard barely bothers to glance at her. He sometimes smells of Chanel, number 5. Stella is not yet in danger. She'd be a beauty if we got her decent dresses. The day comes when Richard sees her for the first time. I hear the sound of feet on the gravel stones. Richard's footsteps. The little hurried ones of Annette. For one moment, I'm transformed into the little girl, holding the hand of an all-powerful and kind father. Stella's flesh falls away from her bones. The face of her murderer is reflected in the blue sky of an innocent child's eyes. Once upon a time, all was well. Then someone got the strings mixed up. I can't find the beginning anymore. The web beneath my hands gets more and more confused from day to day. Day, you will bury, suffocate me.